Ni hao ma. Hello, everyone. Let's start healing. I'm Adrianne Murchison, and welcome to a very special episode 25 of the Let's Start Healing podcast. I just greeted you in Mandarin Chinese. I said, "Are you good?" You know what we say. We have more in common than we think, and what we have in common can change the world. So as I said, this is a very special episode. It's titled Our Mother's Keeper. I am actually coming to you during a very significant time in the month of September for me. I'm in between two special dates. One date is the anniversary of my mother passing, and the other is her birthday. And for years after she passed, 13 years ago, September was a very tough month for me. And in recent years, it's been better. You never know about grief, though. It can rear its head at any time. But this month is giving me an opportunity to both honor my mother and to talk to you all about connecting with the Spirit of God within us and also staying connected to our loved ones, which it is completely possible to do, to continue to have a relationship with our loved ones after they pass away. It's not often that I say someone died. I'm much more comfortable saying that person passed on, because to me, literally, that is what they did. They passed on to another place, a place where they are with their higher power. And it is absolutely possible to continue to have a relationship with someone after they've passed on. So let's talk about moms. I have this image in my mind when I think of moms sometimes of the Greek theater masks where one is happy and one is sad. And you know how the sad face looks, where it's like it's almost like the person is crying, like that ugly cry face is kind of how the sad face can look sometimes. Because as deeply as I loved my mom, and I loved her so deeply and continued to love her so deeply in my heart, oh my goodness, she could drive me bananas sometimes. And I would have that ugly cry face on, especially if I hurt her in some way. Sometimes we might get in an argument and I would just have to let her know that I was upset with her about something, and that would hurt her. And so me hurting her would in turn hurt me. And I would feel like I was shot. I mean, to hurt my mother, it took everything out of me. I would just feel like toast. And so that mask with the ugly cry face, it makes me think of whenever I would hurt my mother, whenever I would hurt her feelings, if I was frank with her about, hey, you did this to me and that really bothered me. She didn't take that well. She did not take that well at all. And then there's the happy face, just the joyous love that I would get from my mom. All of us, our relationships with our mothers are just so deep. And I really feel that the relationship between a mother and child is the most sacred relationship outside of the relationship with God. I honestly do. I was about to say a moment ago that our relationships with our mother, there's so many rooms within our spirit. There's so many rooms that we go into within ourselves when it comes to our relationship with our mother. And that had me thinking of a Bible verse. I'm not going to be able to say what it is, but it's in the New Testament where Jesus is talking about the many rooms in the kingdom of God. So Our guests include Jaaz Jones, who was actually a guest on episode 3 of Let's Start Healing. And she is going to chat with us about the connection that she still has with her late mom. Jaaz is actually the author of a brand new phenomenal book called Women Who Illuminate. And so some of what she will share is also touched on in the book. Lanada Chanel Duncan, another person who was a guest on a previous episode of Let's Start Healing, is going to talk about her relationship with her mom, who thankfully is very much here with us in the present. She's going to share a road trip that she took with her mom years ago that was so much fun. We have Teresa Cuellar, who's going to share something very poignant that her mother imparted to her, something that we should all do. And also Cheryl Phillips, who was featured in episode 11 of Let's Start Healing. I'm going to bring back a segment from that episode when she shares a literal miracle that God brought to her mother and her family. So let's get started. Let's meet our guests, and let's start with Cheryl Phillips. Let's start healing.
This beautiful mother of mine had 4 children already, and all of a sudden, and she had a disease called sarcoidosis, which is a autoimmune disease that affects the major organs in your body, and the body starts to attack those major organs. So once she had that disease, I saw my mother being sick at age 28, all the way till she died at 49. And so she would be in and out of the hospital, but my mother didn't let nothing stop her from living. My mother was very much an outdoors person. And here's the situation, okay? So there was a time point where my mother had to make a decision because she ended up being pregnant with her 5th pregnancy. And at that time point, she had to make a decision if she was going to have this baby with a possibility, as the doctors told her, she would die. She was going to die and the baby would die. And since she already had 4 children, it didn't make any sense to leave these 4 children, at the time I was 15 years old, these 4 children without their mother. Who's going to take care of them? But my mother's faith said, pray and ask God. Mm-hmm. And my mother heard God say, have the baby. Everyone told her to have an abortion. And my mother, knowing how sick she was, went on with the pregnancy. Well, based on that pregnancy, what happened was the very next day after making that decision, she went into congestive heart failure and had to be put on life support. So here's the decision. Mm-hmm. I trust you, God. Mm-hmm. I'm going to go where you say. I know Jesus is part of my life, and I'm going to have this baby. I trust you more than I trust myself. So she gets up to make that decision. She goes to the doctor's office for a regular visit. When she goes to that visit, she doesn't come home. She goes straight to the hospital and she's put on life support. She was on life support for 7 months. That's 7 months of me not being with my mother. So here it is. Every day I'm saying, Lord, Jesus, you told me everything will be okay. I never thought about what was my mother going through, knowing that she made a decision that didn't look like it was the right decision. Because now she's away from her 4 kids for 7 months. This is my first year of going into high school, and I'm not with my mother. I'm separated from my brothers because not everybody wants to take care of 4 children. Mm-hmm. So it's me and my sister one place, my brothers another place. That meant for 7 months I didn't see my brothers. I question, God, why us? What is it that you're trying to show? No, my mother is fully conscious during this whole time on life support. So there's no way of communicating. Those 7 months I'm praying and I'm trying to figure out the situation. There are time points where I'm angry. I'm even expressing my anger to God. But then all of a sudden he gives me a piece and he tells me, Cheryl, take care of your sister. You're going to have a little sister. And so here it is. One day I'm in high school and there was a principal that I will never forget. Mm-hmm. And he makes an announcement over the intercom. We want to congratulate Cheryl because Cheryl had a little sister today. To see where my sister is, to see what my mother had put in her, the God in her, the peace in her, the strength in her, and the rest of us too. And to see that, my sister was born full term, fully healthy. Well, I like to say this is a witness of God's hand suddenly. At the same time that my sister was born, my mother went off life support and restore her own health at the same time. My sister's name is Precious. God designed her with a purpose and she's flying high with it. My mother, investment and her faith was successful and was true, and that God can do anything and all things. All he needs you to do is relax and trust him. My mother shared with me that life is about understanding how important you are to God. We come up with our own answer. That brings on fear, the fear of anxiousness, anxiety, destruction, worry. When you're in a storm, sometimes you don't realize there's an opening, or you don't realize that this is not going to always be this way.
Thank you, Cheryl Phillips. Cheryl is publishing a book titled Lessons in the Storms, where she shares aspects of her life, her relationship with God, and yes, of course, lessons that she's learned in the storms. On our last podcast, our guest was James Sims. He mentioned a podcast that I found intriguing when he brought it up, and I went and checked it out. And it's a podcast called We Don't Die. And there was an episode on HeartMath that I started listening to. The host, Sandra Champlain, her guest was Howard Martin, and he is an expert on HeartMath. And in listening to him explain what that is, and he was talking about heart intelligence and the science behind heart intelligence. And it really inspired me to want to bring this particular podcast episode to you. The heart is very significant to me. My mother had a heart condition. She had congestive heart failure. She had an enlarged heart. She lived with congestive heart failure for about 21 years. She passed in 2006, as I mentioned, and my dad passed in 1985. I feel in many ways I embody that saying that we are spirits having a human experience. After my father passed, I had a real need to stay connected to him, and I'm so grateful that God blessed me with being able to continue to have a spiritual connection to my father after he passed. When my mother passed, before she passed, maybe about a month or two before she passed, I had brought up to her how my father had been with me throughout all of these years. So I knew that it was possible for her to also be with me after she was gone. And I wanted her to promise me that she would indeed be with me. And she said, absolutely, I'll do everything I can in my power to be with you. When she passed, it was such a traumatic experience initially that I consciously released my father and put him on the back burner, because even though my mother said that she was going to be with me, I felt like I needed to hold on to her and not let her go. But I've moved on down the road. I definitely hold on to her, but I'm not holding on to her with such a tight grip, because I want to live an authentic life, and I want to be in abundance and not in need. I don't want to feel that I have a need to control. Not that I could, but I think the idea of, let me hold on to her with such a tight grip me trying to control situations that are beyond my control. So it's kind of like an exercise in madness and insanity. But my mom, oh my gosh, she has been with me in so many significant ways. I could tell you so many things about just signs, for lack of a better word, of her being with me, that she would let me know I am here. One Mother's Day, I was in my bedroom and she had made a scrapbook. She gave it to me years before she passed, and it had photos and a letter and cards. And she was basically saying to me how much she loved me and how I was such a gift to her. And it was very beautiful. And she wanted me to look at this scrapbook every Mother's Day. This particular Mother's Day, she was gone, and it was maybe the first or second one after she had passed. And before I actually got out of the bed, I had the scrapbook beside me, and I just wanted to get my cry out before I really got up. And so I looked at the scrapbook, and I was praying, and I was talking to her, and I was boohoo crying. I felt like, okay, I had gotten my good cry out, and I walk out of my bedroom and I walked down the hall into the living room, and off the living room was a sunroom, and there was a long, high table at the window, and a long, thin table that you might put behind a couch or something like that. But this happened to be against the window, and on that table, I had a framed photo of her, and inside the framed photo, I had a smaller photo just sort of sitting in the frame of her. The windows are closed, and I walk out into the living room. The photo that is in the frame normally is out of the frame. So again, this is a smaller photo. It's out of the frame, and it is across the room on the floor. Never has that happened before that day or since that day. There was nothing that would have lifted that photo up out of the frame to move it across the room onto the floor. The windows weren't open. Even if they were open, wind wouldn't blow in that way. But there was nothing to create that incident. That's one of so many things that have taken place where she has just shown me that she is with me. And then she will appear in dreams, or she will definitely appear in my consciousness or show up in my consciousness, where I just feel the blessing of her in my mind, in my consciousness, and I'm having an exchange with her. And I mentioned that she had a heart condition. She was a small framed person, and her heart, in the last couple of months, her heart would beat so forcefully in her chest. She might be going through a difficult time where she would be doing very well, and then all of a sudden she'd take a decline, and we would be fearful of how much time she had left. And I would sleep in the bed with her because she wasn't doing well, and she would be breathing heavily, and so I'd want to be with her throughout the night. There were some nights, more than one night, where her heart would just beat so forcefully that it would literally lift her upper body up off the pillow. It would just be incredible, and it was something to me what rest could do for you, what sleep could do for you, what God could do for you, because as she would rest, she might be experiencing this forceful heartbeat at 1 or 2 a.m. And by 8 a.m., there would be a quieting within her. Her forceful heartbeat would have subsided, and she would be much better. That happened so many times. I was just amazed by her heart. I was amazed by the last few months before she passed, the abundance of blessings that we would experience as a family. My brothers were living out of town, and they would come back and forth and stay for a number of days. Nieces and nephews would come back and forth in town and stay for long periods of time in her final months. And the abundance of miracles that would happen and the love that was coming through that time and the whole time from the time that we knew probably a year before that she didn't have much longer is so significant. So I'm listening to this podcast, We Don't Die, and I'm listening to Howard Martin explain the intelligence of the heart and how the science behind heart intelligence and trying to bridge the gap. This is my word. He did say bridge the gap, but I would say bridge the gap between the spiritual and the science. I hope I'm characterizing that right. And he would want to bridge the gap to mainstream, he said, so he could talk to police departments and fire departments and universities about the heart and how the heart is so connected to our emotions. And I know that in one sense, many of us know this because a very stressful person can have a heart attack or have high blood pressure or their heart can go out of whack. He says that he talks about measuring arrhythmic patterns. He talks about the heart rate and variability and analysis. And it's remarkable to me because I have a perspective of it from such a spiritual place. It's very important what he's doing and what he's imparting to us. And I also find it remarkable how we need proof. We need science to validate something that we can't accept as necessarily being real. I talk to one of my family members regularly. We talk about all kinds of different things. And recently we were chatting about spirituality, and I very much like to operate from a place of spirituality, although I live in the real world and I'm very realistic about things at the same time. And he operates from the realm of being a human being and living in these real things that happen day in, day out. And I was saying to him how I think it's so fascinating how we as human beings, we don't have a problem with believing how smart we are. We can walk around and we can think, oh my gosh, I'm so smart and I do this so well. I'm so intelligent. As human beings, we are really, we can be really invested in our own abilities. And yet there's other aspects of ourselves that we don't trust. There's that spirit side of us that we doubt and we don't trust and believe with anywhere near the conviction that we will believe about our physical abilities or our brain. Like we will believe the abilities of our brain, but we won't necessarily be as convinced about the abilities of our mind. For me, our mind, our true mind, our highest mind is consciousness, the actual consciousness of God that we are a part of and connected to. I just think it's something, and I include myself in this. Trust me, I include myself in this. But it's something how we move on down the road in terms of I'll say myself, I will move on down the road in terms of my spiritual growth. And then I'll have doubts about what I know spiritually. But then I will try to rely on my mental capacity and my mental abilities far greater than I will sometimes what I might know spiritually, like really know. I have plenty. Let's take, for example, I look at a past experience where I was relying on my smartness and my skill. And I could take a past experience where I was relying on God. And I have so many past experiences where I trusted God and I trusted my communication with God or what came through me from God, the blessing that came about that was beyond me, that had nothing to do with my ability. It was completely God. I have countless experiences that I can point to about that. But the human part of me wants to go to my mental abilities and my skills that I get from what I think I'm smart in and what I think my ego and my brain has accomplished for me. At best, I would think that I would be able to at least operate not at the same time. You can't be in a human physical ego sense and in a spiritual consciousness at the same time. So I don't want to say equally, but I would think that at least my conviction about my spiritual consciousness and my knowing about that would at least be at the same level as my ego consciousness. I actually became fascinated with this when I was listening to Howard Martin talk about HeartMath. There's an actual monitor that can look at HeartMath and your heart intelligence and analyze it. There's such a dichotomy there for me with my mother. I feel like I see both sides. So much I feel a part of my mother. I mean, we were different and the same at the same time. And thankfully, I have a strong heart, very good condition. At the same time, I know that I have my mother's heart. I know that I am my mother, and I am her because of her heart. So these are some things that I ponder. In this first clip that we hear from Jaaz, the audio is not perfect, but she is talking about something so poignant regarding her mom that I just had to bring it to you.
Well, when I think of a spiritual experience with my mother, I always think of butterflies. Before and after, my mother collected butterflies. I've inherited some of her butterflies. But since she transitioned in moments, especially what I consider as significant moments, like her transitioning day or her birthday, when I always go for a walk or a run and I'll encounter a butterfly. It's not just seeing butterflies in the mist, it's an encounter where a butterfly will dance around me. And so, as you know, we had dinner the day of my mom's transitioning day, and that day when I went outside, when I got ready to come and see you, as late as it was, there was a butterfly that was circling right outside as I pulled out of the driveway, and I stopped and I realized, I was like, that's Mom. And that's why it's such a standout, because butterflies are always near when she is present. What's really interesting for me, again from a spiritual standpoint, is when I'm feeling her presence or feeling the need of her presence and in conversation, that I will dream of her. I will dream conversations, and I don't dream of her often. She used to be, when she first transitioned, was really present all the time. And I'd have these conversations. You know, I told you that's how I wrote my book, in my mother's voice, is in conversation with her and in my runs. And I had this dream where my mom was sitting by my bed. It was really more of an experience because I had just laid down. It was in that quasi sleep stage, but I saw my mother and she was just in all white. She didn't say a word, but I heard everything she said. There were no words, but it was at that point that I knew that would be the last time that she would be that present with me for a while. It's time for me to go. I'm always with you. But when she first transitioned, I would see her, feel her. She would be present with me all the time. But I knew in that moment, in the silence, that it was just time for her to go and expand. Right. It was really more like an expansion. You know, and I've expressed this, it's like my mother brings people into my life. I always share it. I feel like she brought you into my life. I always say my life is A, B, and BB, you know, before book and after book. And it was in writing my book that there was a transformation and a transition, this energetic gravitational pull that my mom would just show up. There would be people that would show up at just very special points at any given time, and the dialogue, the conversation would be around or connected to whatever I was experiencing in communication with my mom.
One of the aspects that was so fascinating for me about Jaaz's comments was the dream that she mentioned of her mom. I have another very close friend who shared a very similar dream that she had of her mother sitting at the edge of her bed. I personally do know that our loved ones can come to us in our dreams. I am a big dream person, and so I have dreams that are just dreams. I have dreams that are speaking to me and guiding me, teaching me lessons. And then I have dreams where I know that I'm actually being visited by a loved one in the dream. But then I could have just a regular dream and that loved one is just in the dream. So I'm able to differentiate. And because of all of that, I'm very intrigued by the dreams that Jaaz shared, and for me, that a very close friend had shared years ago about her mother appearing to her in her dream, sitting on her bed, and in awareness and an understanding that her mother had to go on. There were things she had to do, which is what Jaaz shared. For me, with my mother, I had a dream where my mother appeared in my bedroom. I was sitting on the edge of my bed, and she was sitting beside me, and then she was standing up, and she was beautiful, glowing. I mean, she was beautiful in person, in reality, but in the same way that I understand from Jaaz and another friend of mine, there was a serene beauty about her in this particular dream. And then she left my room and she went into the hallway, and she turned back to me and she just said, "Thank you." And she was thanking me for caring for her during the time that she was ill. So it's striking to me how similar, as I said, Jaaz's dream and my friends, and then mine was slightly different. So our next segment with Jaaz, she is chatting about her mother and very trying times that her mother experienced and the lessons that she learned as her mother was navigating these trials in her life.
When I think of lessons learned from my mother, my chapter in my most recent book, Women Who Illuminate, is Lessons from the Darkness for Living in the Light. And that darkness, being with my mom, experiencing her challenge with mental illness, bipolar nervous breakdown, though globally, just in general, we look at that as this very dark place, my mother's vulnerability was a gift for me, because so many people, and especially when I look at women, when I look at the dynamic of the Black community, and just a lot of people in general, have a lot of shame around mental illness and don't want to discuss it. My mother was very open and authentic. And one of the things that I said in my first book, which was the opening, is that my mother threw me a life preserver even when she was drowning. And for me, that openness and that vulnerability became my strength. It became my choice. I got to choose wellness, because I watched my mom in all of her suffering seek for a better feeling thought. Even when it was difficult, even when it was hard, she would reach for a better feeling thought. And it led me to really want to study energy, to want to study mental health, to really engage in mind management and meditation, because I saw the opposite. as well. I saw her become dependent on Valiums and experimental drugs for mental health. And, I would fuss at her sometimes, stop being a guinea pig. But I also recognized that what that did was it opened up other options for me in terms of my approach. So my mother willing to be able to try a lot of different methods to cure what she thought was curing her mental health. What she showed me was that I had the choice of choosing my thoughts. I also have the choice of my own healing. That's the power. And I know that's what your show is all about. Let's start healing. And for me, healing begins with what I choose to think. And I do get to choose it. And I learned that was the life preserver that she threw me. You get to choose. And I choose wellness.
I know you're thinking, what is a better feeling thought? It seems obvious, but still there's a little question in your mind. Well, here's Jaaz Jones again explaining a better feeling thought.
I started listening to Esther Hicks, Law of Attraction, and that's a term that she uses, is reaching for a better feeling thought. And even in our coaching program and working with Mad Miracles, what I have found, so often we get caught up in our emotions, right? In quote, negative feelings. And we think we're being driven by those feelings, but it's the thoughts that we think that have led to the feeling. And by simply evoking the question, what would feel better than this? What would feel better than this? You have to think that, right? So what would feel better than being depressed? What would feel better than wallowing in my sorrow? Whatever that is, what would feel better? So to reach for that better feeling thought, I have to first identify what would feel better than this. And there's a line in the Bible, one of my favorite books is the book of Philippians. I read that over and over, Philippians 4. I read it over and over when I was going through my healing process. Whatever things are good, whatever things are positive, think on these things. And that's reaching for a better feeling thought. Think about what feels good. And when we think about what feels good, it will cause us to feel better. But we feel bad because we're thinking on the things that bring us sorrow. We're thinking on lack rather than abundance. And if we think about gratitude, so when I think of reaching for a better feeling thought, I think about what's one thing in this moment I'm grateful for. And if I can find one thing, what's another thing I'm grateful for? And there's always something to be grateful for. And the more I think about what I'm grateful for, the more that comes to me to be grateful for. And it really is a shift in the perspective of reaching for a better feeling thought and allow gratitude to be the guidance. So that's like my mantra is I am grateful for. And that's my shift whenever, like we all have the moments, right? Whenever I feel like I'm drowning, whenever I feel like I'm in a negative spiral, whatever is not feeling the way I want to feel, the first shift is to think of what I'm grateful for. Because gratitude, two things about gratitude. One, we can only be grateful in the moment, right? Like, what am I grateful for? So to be grateful is to be grateful in this moment. When I'm wallowing in thought and stuck in the story, that's about something that has happened or that I might be afraid that's going to happen. But in this moment right now, I'm grateful that I'm breathing. I'm grateful that I have my wellness. I'm here. I'm alive. I'm sitting with you. We're interacting. We're connecting. I am grateful for this moment. And that's the better feeling thought, is to be grateful in this moment.
I'm so grateful to Jaaz Jones for being so revealing. Jaaz actually started a women's self-empowerment organization called Mad Miracles with her daughter Jania, and you can learn more about Mad Miracles by visiting madmiracles.com. Often when someone passes, such as our parents or our spouse or our sibling or anybody who's close to us, I have talked to many people and experienced myself their presence in those very early days. And I remember when my mother passed, it was in the wee hours of the morning. And several hours later, actually the next evening, I was in my home, in my apartment, and my brothers were there, and I had a couple of close girlfriends there, and I felt my mother's presence. My brothers were sitting at one end of the room in the living room area, and my close girlfriends and I were sitting at the dining room table. And I remember feeling my mother's presence. And my mother said to me, "Call Rosemary." She said, literally, I heard my name, Adrianne, call Rosemary. And I remember it as clearly as this moment that we're in right now. And Rosemary was a lifelong friend of my mom's who was the maid of honor in her wedding with my dad 50 some years ago when they got married. And what was funny was, number one, I never talked to Rosemary on the phone that I can recall. And my mom hadn't talked to Rosemary in years that I recall, but they had that kind of relationship where you could go years without talking to someone and you just pick up where you left off, and that bond and closeness is always still there. But she wasn't someone that would normally cross my mind, but my mother just planted that seed. Adrianne, call Rosemary. And I knew that she wanted me to let her know that she had passed. And the other thing about it is that my mom had a stepsister who was my godmother, and we had lost touch with her for some years, and we kept trying to get a current phone number, and anytime we got a phone number, it was not a working number. And we would really put on our sleuthing hats and see if we could try to track down my godmother, and we were not successful. Well, my godmother and Rosemary were related. So I got my mother's phone book and I looked up Rosemary's number and phoned her home in Niagara Falls, New York. And actually, she was at that time in Hawaii visiting, I believe, one of her children's family. And they gave me the number to her in Hawaii, and I called her and we talked and I gave her the news, and it occurred to me to ask her for my godmother's number if she had any current number. I really didn't think that she would, but she did. And I just thought that was just so ironic, because my mom and I had tried so much to get my godmother's number. But also the bigger thing was that my mother's presence was right there. And I remember very much saying to myself, I'm not going to let them know, because they're going to be like, yeah, okay, right, Adrianne. And I remember looking across the room at my brothers and thinking, wow, it would be something if they knew that she was with us right now and that I'm communicating with her. But now, actually, for the first time in this moment that I'm saying this, the very same thing could have been happening with them, and they just didn't communicate it out loud either. So I'm saying all of this to say that our loved ones who pass on can be with us, and they are with us as long as we need them to be, or as long as we want them to be. Our next guest is Teresa Cuellar, who grew up in California, and she will share a very poignant message that her mother imparted to her. It's a message that we can all relate to, and as I said, it's very poignant. And apropos that you will hear crickets in the background, so you might have an instinct to look around and say, what is that? Where am I? The sun is shining, but it is actually crickets where we are talking to Teresa. So let's meet her. Let's start healing.
My mom and I had a very unique relationship. I don't think it was traditional. It was what I'd call atypical, because though she was unable to show me love and affection, she showed me other gifts that I feel expressed her love. Like, for instance, we would go to the Rose Garden across the street from USC, and it was the biggest rose garden I've ever seen. But every weekend, I would run around that rose garden, and I would stop and smell the roses and look at them and read their names. And I felt that was her way of saying, in the midst of chaos, just stop and smell the roses. Because for those who don't know, USC is actually in the hood. And there was a lot of chaos going on in that area at the time. This is back in the 60s, 70s. But to this day, if I see a rose bush, I will stop and I will smell it and I will touch it and I will think of my mom. And it immediately puts me in a place of gratitude and love. And I just thank her for that. Though she may not have thought she gave me a great gift, she really did.
Thank you, Teresa Cuellar. Our final guest is Lanada Chanel Duncan, who is going to share that road trip that she took with her mom. It's a trip that I'm sure all of us can relate to.
So Tom Joyner Morning Show, Tom Joyner used to do this thing on Thursday mornings where he would, it was called the Thursday Morning Mom. And basically what you'd have to do was write a letter to Tom Joyner, and you'd have to talk about your mom and why you felt that you should win this trip with your mom. I wrote a letter in trying to win this trip, and I talked about my mom's bout with cancer. My mother's had cancer twice and beat it 2 times. To this day, no trace of cancer, thank the Lord. And I remember the morning that this was announced on the radio. I was riding in the car, and Tom Joyner comes on and he says, "It's time for the Thursday Morning Mom winner." And he starts reading my letter that I wrote about my mother and her bout with cancer. And basically, long story short, I'm in the car crying. Like,
are you going to tell us what the letter says?
No, I'm not.
Please, give us
it's
a little
just basically about having cancer twice, coming out with, I remember using the word brave honors 2 times. You know, the first time she had it, I was young, honestly. I mean, I was in high school, but I was in high school. High schoolers, the only thing they're thinking about are themselves. And I'm sure I was there, just totally not really in tune with the fact that my mom was struggling with cancer. And we were in Philadelphia, living there at the time. And she was just sick all the time, needing help to get to treatments. And my sister was a little older, was driving. I just remember my sister sometimes having to drive her home or whatever, or going to go get her and stuff like that. And my head was just in the clouds. I wasn't really supportive like I should have been for my mom. And so I talked about that a little bit. And then I talked about her second time when it came back, and how that at that time that I was a little older and I was able to kind of just help her be there and be more of a support. I talked about how she came out with brave honors that first time with very little family support, her kids, and raising, kids at the same time, or, teenagers. Mm-hmm. And then the second time, and how it was more there for her. And I just think that my mom deserves this, because never really took a trip with my mother that I can remember. So I won the trip, basically, long story short, and $500. Now, the trip, I'll try and cut this down, was on the Greyhound bus. You can go anywhere you want on Greyhound bus.
What year was this?
This was
oh my.
I was pregnant with my son when we took this trip. Who was 21, so it had to be almost maybe close to 21 years ago. $500 plus a trip anywhere you wanted to go. Now you had on Greyhound, you had 10 days, and you can go anywhere you wanted on Greyhound for 10 days. Okay. Let me go back. I was pregnant when we took
How far
this
along
trip.
were you?
I had to be like 8-9 months,
Oh, my
maybe. I'm
goodness.
guessing. I think I was showing, and we decided to take this trip because you had to take it a certain amount of time, and then the money. My mom was just all excited and just teary-eyed. So we take this trip. We go to Vegas. We went to New Orleans first, and we went to Las Vegas. So we spent a couple days in New Orleans. That one, okay, fine. I'm pregnant. Let me just say that again.
and that's no short ride.
Oh, no. I found that out. We have a good time. We're eating and just having a ball, right? In New Orleans, walking the street. So we are in the hotel downtown New Orleans, and we get into this argument she starts talking at the time. Again, I'm still a little young in a way, young adult. And she starts telling me about the importance of young kids not understanding the importance of voting and the importance of your civil rights and the movement and people that marched for us. So we had the right to vote. And it was just something big coming up, I think, at the time. And, I think at the time I wasn't really a voter, honestly, and didn't really see the importance of it or the benefits of it. And we get in this hotel, we're packing our stuff. I remember this day. This is the day we're leaving to catch the bus now to go to Vegas. Mm-hmm. We're in the hotel. She gets so upset. She's just like, I don't understand. I'm like, what's the big deal? And all this other stuff. And we are literally in the hotel having this argument in the morning, trying to pack our stuff. And I just brought my mom to tears. And I remember this day, and it hurt my heart, but it was like, truly. So I just remember thinking, let's just get to our next stop. Mm-hmm. So we go to Vegas. Now, mind you, I'm pregnant. I think I've said that 5 times. On Greyhound. It was just
New Orleans to Vegas.
Okay. I want to say it felt like a week to get there. Mm-hmm. Literally. It was such a long ride. Texas was almost 2 days alone. I'm pretty sure of it. It was crazy. My mother was talking to everybody on the Greyhound bus, telling them where I lived and I was married and she's got 2 kids.
And she don't vote.
She don't vote. Exactly. And she doesn't even vote.
Can you believe this child?
Yeah. My mother's the type, you never met a stranger, but Lord, it was like, Mom, I don't know these people, and seriously, can you just not? But I want to tell you, it was probably by the time we got home, with the exception of the fact that we were completely exhausted, because who can sleep on the bus? I mean, just coming back after the trip, because we had a great time in Vegas. Everything was just wonderful, but it was a great experience with my mother, with the exception of that argument where I almost brought her to tears about me not voting. Mm-hmm. And that's why now it's like, when I vote, Mom, I voted, I'm like the first, that's the first call I make, but I will never forget that argument or that experience. So
oh my gosh.
Thank you, Tom Joyner.
Thank you, Lanada Chanel Duncan. Lanada is an interior decorator and owner of BE Decors. She specializes in peaceful living spaces and she caves. You should see her own she cave. So thank you again, Lanada. I remember when I was a teenager and my early teens, and I went through this phase where I was snapping at my mom. It's very strange to look back on it now. It's hard for me to believe that I was such a brat in my early teens. I used to talk to her in a very disrespectful way. And one time we were at a department store and we had run into a mother and daughter that we knew, and I was acting very funky. And I always remember my mother, and when I say funky, I was acting disrespectful. And I remember my mom saying how I really disrespected myself. And it was worse than her going off on me. She was like, you should be embarrassed. You really disrespected yourself. It was such a lesson for me. That might have actually been the last time that I acted disrespectful. So thank you so much for being with us on this journey of our Mother's Keepers, and we will see you next time. In the meantime, remember to follow us on Instagram, like us on Facebook, send me that email at letstarthealingpodcast@gmail.com. And you can listen to all of our podcast episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and our podcast YouTube channel. Let's start healing.